In this video, we're going over the best characters to play in low elo. That's right, this is a metal ranked tier list, talking about the best ages from every rank from iron to, honestly, plat, and we're gonna break it all down. But if you've been hard stuck in a metal rank for far too long, then you need SkillCapped.com, where we have in-depth guides over every single rank, giving you actionable steps to take to climb to the immediate next one, including big mistakes you're making, positioning errors, mechanical drills, and our private Discord coaching has been so freaking popular, with more people reaching all-time highs than ever before. So what are you waiting for? Stop being hard stuck and check it out right now in the links down below. Now remember, we're not looking at what is objectively meta in pro play. We're looking at what is realistically gonna be the easiest characters to climb with because of the kit that works with all these low elo games. And to start off with, we're starting off in the D tier. At the bottom is Harbor. Now Harbor is a rather difficult character to play. He requires a lot of learning and setup, and I think the most difficult part about Harbor is that he's really only played in a double controller lineup, where most of the time in the metal tiers, you're gonna fight tooth and nail to get even one goddamn controller. In addition to that, Harbor is a character that if you don't use your walls perfectly, they could actually mess up your team, get them killed, get yourself killed. So all of that combined just makes Harbor pretty bad for ranked metal tier play. Next off, we have Yoru, and I know people are gonna freak out about this one, but Yoru actually has a really low win rate in the lower ranks of play, and it scales up as players get better and better with him. He actually has an incredibly high win rate in Radiant, but all the way down in most ranks, he's just not gonna perform. Not because the character can't work or isn't powerful, he's just really hard to learn. He has a really high skill cap, and if you're putting in a ton of effort into learning Yoru, eventually you'll get there, but he's definitely not gonna be the easiest character for you to pick up and climb through the ranks with, and the reality of it is you would probably be higher rank on a different character. Now last up in the D tier, we have KO. Now this character is a character that really needs teamwork and coordination. Yes, you can flash yourself, but he's kind of doing a budget duelist impression where a lot of duelists do a better job. They just do it easier. I really do think that KO shines when you're getting value out of the utility and information, the denial of abilities that you're getting out of your knife, and you're also able to set your team up with pop flashes, things that are one, difficult, and two, unlikely to get to work the lower in rank you are. You're gonna see that with a couple of initiators on this list, that characters that are purely meant to set up other players when you're playing with players you can't rely on or don't have the skills to necessarily coordinate with you or follow up with you, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, and it's going to be a lot better for you to just take matters into your own hands, but we will talk about that a little bit more later. Now moving on to the C tier, and at the bottom of the C tier, we have Astra. Astra is okay as a controller. I just think that there's a lot of other dome smokers that are going to be able to do a better job in most ranks of play. Astra really shines when you have coordination, setup, and sometimes Astra kind of suffers when people go completely outside of the grain, outside of the norm. They don't even have any strategies at all. They're just kind of running it down randomly, and all these factors make Astra really good in high elo and in coordinated settings, and pretty poor in the low ranks of play. Not to mention, she's a character that is better as a duo controller instead of a solo one. Next up, we do have Breach. Breach is amazingly strong. We all know that, but one of the problems, just like we talked about with KO, is he's primarily a setup character. I do think that even in the metal ranks of play, Breach can be a B or even an A if you have a really good duelist that is kind of working with you and y'all are trying to coordinate very, very deliberately. But solo carry, it's gonna be really, really rough to play this character. I think he's fine, but he's no means easy to get value with. You're gonna have to be a bit of a specialist on him to even carry or climb with him. And all in all, I think there's some other characters that are a bit easier to climb with further up this list. Next up, we do gotta talk about GEKKO. GEKKO is not only difficult to learn, unsolved right now because he's rather new, but a lot of the same things still apply from Breach to GEKKO. It's better to have the coordination, you leave your utility, you can rotate for it, to have people that are gonna play with you and swing with you. And I do think that you have to work pretty hard to get GEKKO to work when there are other characters that could do the job that GEKKO wants to do a bit easier and clutch you up the round. Now last up at the top of C tier, we have Viper, and there's just a lot you have to learn on Viper to make sure that you're playing correctly, the right walls, the right lineups, and a lot of people aren't putting in that work. And if you're playing Viper and you're not doing things right, you're just literally a detriment to your team. Not to mention, Viper oftentimes can feel like a role filler, where if your team is challenging a site first and dying, or swinging through your smokes, or they can't hold their site, you always feel like you don't have the tools to take matters into your own hands for retakes and clutches in the same way that other characters do. And for those reasons, I would say Viper's only at the top of C tier. Now we're moving on to B tier, characters that are a lot lot better for climbing throughout the metal ranks of play. Still not the best, but they're a lot better than the previous tiers we mentioned. At the bottom is Skye. And if you remember, for our meta tier list or our high rank pro play tier list, Skye was number 1, but there are a couple reasons why Skye doesn't make it up that high on this list. Skye's a character that really wants to have players to play around your information, and this is going to be better in duo or trio queue, of course, but for solo carry, metal rank tier, I would say that most of the time, you're going to gather all this info, all this space, and your teammates are not going to play properly around you. In addition to that, I do think that Skye is a rather hard character to master. She's not easy to pick up. She's not easy to get an intuitive sense for how to use her flashes, how to use your utility, when you can whip out your utility and not die, when you need to whip out your utility to get information really quick in the middle of a clutch. There's a lot of things you got to learn, and that complexity makes her, you know, not the easiest character to really get a lot of value with, because I don't think there's a ton of intrinsic value on this character. It's a character that you will get rewarded for if you grind her a lot, but in doing that, you're going to, you know, lose a lot of games in that journey, and I do think that she's way better in like a duo queue setting. Next up, we do got to talk about Chamber. Chamber's here mainly because if you're an aimer, right, you can hard carry a lot of lobbies and, you know, the meta ranks to play, just whipping out your pistol, whipping out your op. Sometimes that's just enough to just destroy the lobby in that way. Who cares about strategy? Who cares about stall? Just punish people that are not disciplined with their utility use. They're peeking angles without flashing it. They're not smoking correctly. They're taking duels with you, and you get to fight them and take multiple 1v1 gun duels. If you're an aimer, this character is amazing. I think he's only down here because I think there's another character that is a bit better if you're an aimer to climb with, but I do think that overall he's a pretty solid character to climb through the metal tiers with. Next off, we do got to talk about Neon, and I would say that momentum is really, really strong when players don't imagine what is possible. And what I mean by that is Neon is going to completely miss timing so many people by being an aggressive character, and you're also putting the burden on a lot of opponents by being the proactive person. And I think that there's a lot of strategies on Neon that are really cheesy but work in, you know, the metal ranks of play. Running and gunning with shotgun, shorty, judge, it's extremely strong when you're trying to do like an eco buy. You're never gonna get dinked very easily when you're like running around with your ultimate, as long as you make sure to keep your momentum going. And overall, I do think that Neon just attacks the meta or attacks the game in a very different way than other characters that gives you extra points just because people are not used to playing against a good Neon. So learn the movement. I think you can learn it in like a solid 20 minutes of practicing, and you're already gonna be a freaking demon on this character in ranked. Now, next up, we do gotta talk about Brimstone. Brimstone is really solid. He's easy to play. You get a lot of intrinsic value out of him. If you learn a couple of lineups, you're kind of just golden, and then some simple gunplay, I think you're gonna have a lot of impact in your games. However, there is like a line on Brim where there's a certain threshold where I think you're kind of capped on your hard carry potential. In close games where both teams are reasonably close together, I think you carry those games every time, but you're not gonna win a game where you have a player that is just like going 1 in freaking 20, right? You're not gonna be able to make up that difference on Brim no matter how well you play most of the time, so it can be a bit frustrating. Still think he's a really solid character, but he's not gonna be dropping no 50 bombs unless you're the GOAT himself. Now, last up in the B tier, we have Cypher, and one of the reasons that Cypher struggles a lot in high tiers of play is because people are really disciplined at clearing all of his trips and traps, right? They use utility, they amply clear it out, and all of your setups just get disappeared out of nowhere on Cypher. That's not really the case in most ranks, honestly. Cypher's gonna get a crazy amount of value because people aren't disciplined in their checking. They love to rush sites, they love to not play quote-unquote disciplined, and Cypher just feasts on that. Someone runs in, gets hit by your trap, you cage off the cross, and all of a sudden you killed one person, denied a push, maybe killed another person, and heavily punish people from not respecting you and not playing the game properly. Now, next up, we do gotta talk about the A tier. These are characters that are legitimately insanely powerful at climbing you through the metal tiers, and I think they're probably the most reliable to get you there outside of the God tier, which we'll talk about in a little bit. First off is Fade. Fade giving you info, Fade clearing corners, having a very powerful ultimate. All of these things together make Fade a really, really solid addition to pretty much any composition. You're bringing a ton of value yourself. You have the means to clutch up, and your abilities bring you a lot of what I call intrinsic value, value that is automatic, that you don't really have to earn, right? Someone's playing out of position, well, if they get hit by a Fade Eye, easy kill. Someone's just holding a close corner, well, they're gonna get hit by a dog, easy kill. These players that don't play properly are subject to this simple amount of utility. The better a person is playing strategically, the better and stronger they are at dealing with utility, and the worse they're playing positionally, the easier they are to get value against with utility. And that's why Fade gets so much value here, and she's so strong. And for a lot of the reasons that Fade is strong, Sova is strong as well. I do think that Sova is a bit better in the meta when we look at things more objectively at the highest ranks of play, because the Sovas get a lot better and the tactics get a lot better. But even if we get rid of all of that, Sova's dart just gets a crazy amount of value. There's so many players that when they're not playing in the proper area, the positions like we talked about with Fade, a dart goes up on a high wall and they get scanned and killed for free. And Sova gets to do these things. You get to clear out certain areas, clear out smokes, challenge with your dart. And I do think that Hunter's Fury is just really, really strong to deny pushes and stop presses. Yes, there's skill to Sova and he's very hard to master, but I do think that even without mastering him, his kit brings so much to the table that you're well suited in most metal ranks. And as the games get more and more strategically complex, you learn relative to Sova's impact. Like, he's a great character to scale with you from the low ranks to the high ranks, as opposed to a character like Yoru that has like such a steep cutoff between the good players and the bad ones. Sova's like a more linear improvement to impact ratio. I hope that made sense. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Omen, which I think is the best controller for the metal ranks to play for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's really good as a solo smoker. You could do whatever you need as a dome smoker. On the maps that you would like a Viper or a Lion smoker, it's going to be a bit harder to get him to work, of course. But for all the other maps, I think you can make him work. Even the maps that are not like perfectly optimal for him, you can still get him to work. And more importantly, I think that Omen allows you to play a lot more free with your play style and have a higher potential impact. You get to lurk, you get to pick your battles, you get to be aggressive, you get to blind your teammates in and enable them, and you get to go and frag yourself in and out of your smokes. I think the combination of all these things give Omen a really high carry potential. He does a really good job at kind of fulfilling his role like Brim does, with a higher ceiling of impact. And all in all, I do think that Omen is a fantastic character, similar to Sova, where he kind of scales with how good you get at the character is how much impact you'll have, and that's a really good thing. While at the same time, even bad Omens are still getting a decent amount of value automatically. Next up, we do got to talk about Phoenix, a character that we rated very lowly for pro play is really high for the metal tiers, because Phoenix just kind of does everything you could possibly need. He flashes, he entries you onto site with his wall, he can clear cubbies, he can heal himself, he can gather information with his ult. He's that jack of all trades character that is phenomenal in ranked. Phoenix is not the easiest character to learn, of course, but he brings so many tools to the table, and combined with your really powerful ultimate that I think has a dominoes effect, where if you start popping off in this character, you're just going to get some crazy amounts of ults that is just going to kind of continuously go into more and more impactful plays. And Phoenix does everything you need to take a site yourself. Like, if you're tired of getting killed by an op that's just holding an angle, or if your teams aren't droning you in, or no one's clearing a cubby, doesn't matter. Phoenix can still get value even in spite of all those things, and that's the reason why he's so impactful. Now, at the top of the A tier, we have Reyna, but with a little bit of a caveat. We all know how dominant Reyna can be if you're the best aimer in the lobby. If you're taking aggressive duels and you're winning those duels, you can easily climb to any rank with Reyna very, very easily. However, you need that aim, right? If you're someone that considers yourself an aimer, Reyna can ignore a lot of these tactics and a lot of the nonsense. Hell, you might not even need a functional team or composition, and you can still drop a freaking 30 bomb and carry a game. But I don't know if that's necessarily something that I would encourage. I don't think that's a great way to play, because then you don't really learn the game properly. You just become good at aiming. But I do think it's actually a lot easier to improve your mechanical skill than it is your understanding of the game. So as far as giving you a character that is the easiest to climb with, Reyna is a character that you could learn the mechanics behind her and then climb at least out of some of the lowest ranks fairly easily, in my opinion. But I don't necessarily encourage this, by the way. So yeah. Now, last up, we got to talk about the S tier characters, the characters that give you all the tools you need to basically put a game entirely on your shoulders, which is what you're gonna have to do a lot anyways. And yeah, I think the bottom of the S tier is actually Sage, and this one's a little bit strange. I think many people are not gonna understand why Sage is here, but I think there's a couple of reasons. Number one, wall is incredibly strong when people aren't on the same page, when people aren't destroying it fast enough, aren't reacting to it fast enough. Delaying and denying space with your wall and your slows, super good, and players aren't doing as much mix-ups or complicated strategies to play around a Sage at all. And in addition to that, I think the heal and the res are insanely good abilities, just flat rate. When I talk about intrinsic value value. I think you get a ton of value on Sage without doing hardly much of anything besides just using your abilities. And I do think that that's something that's kind of irreplaceable. And when you combine the factors together, I do think that Sage brings a lot of automatic value to the table. She's a fairly simple character to pick up and still bring a lot of value to the table without even mastering the character. And for these reasons, I'm putting her in the S tier. Next up, we do got to talk about Jett. Jett is a really hard character to master. We all know that, but she's also just flat out very, very powerful. The ability to op better than most characters or just about any other character, to take aggressive duels and run away, to challenge aggressively, force engagements. This type of stuff really works in ranked as a whole, but especially in the metal tiers of play, you can get away with so much on this character that you can just farm the enemy team, have incredibly high impact. And while Jett is a very hard character to master, I don't think you need to master her to get out of bronze or silver or gold. You just need to get progressively better, and I think that Jett gives you all the tools that you need to make a large impact. The next up, we do got to talk about Killjoy, and I'm putting Killjoy because Killjoy just brings a ton of ability value. Your turret is amazing. You get to just make your team play on the opposite point and just heavily stack. Killjoy is super strong in the pro meta as well, but for ranked, most players just don't even want to deal with a Killjoy. They just want to rotate off. They don't want to deal with a Killjoy at all. You're going to get a ton of value because people aren't clearing your utility, playing around your utility. They're not ready for you to use your utility in the middle of a fight, using a turret to peek at them or anything like that. And I do think that you could get pretty high on Killjoy without being able to aim hardly at all and knowing pretty little about the strategy of the game as a whole. Now, before we talk about the best character, let's talk really quickly about Deadlock, which I felt was just too early to place her. If I would have to guess, I would say that she's low B tier or high C, but at this point, I think it's a little bit too early, so she's unplaced. Now, the best character, I think, in the metal tiers of play all the way up to platinum and maybe even low diamond, I would say is Raze. Now, Raze is fantastic in coordinated play as well, fantastic in pro meta as well, but Raze is kind of that perfect median that gives you all the means to hard carry a game like Reyna or Jett, while at the same time bringing some utility to the table that gives you automatic value even if you're not popping off that day. Information, damage, being able to secure kills with your ultimate, a lot simpler than like a Jett knife or a Reyna ult or anything like that. And you're just basically guaranteed a certain amount of value no matter how bad you're playing, with the same upside as many of these other characters. You attack in a very different way than many other characters as well, and requires discipline to deal with you. And I think that all in all, Raze is just the best character to grind with if you really want to make it to Diamond, Ascendant, Immortal, or even Radiant. And to help you along, the SkillCapped website down below has tips and tricks over all of these characters. If you want to master them, it gives you step-by-step instruction on how to improve yourself, fix your mistakes, and climb on these characters. And our private Discord coaching will give you everything you need to take your gameplay to the next level. So what are you waiting for? Check it out right now in the links down below.